September 25, 1944. 3rd Army Headquarters, somewhere in eastern France. George Patton receives a message from Omar Bradley that should stop him cold, assume the defensive. Fuel is gone, the advance is over, Market Garden needs the supplies now. For 3 months, Patton's tanks have torn across France faster than any army in history. 400 miles in 30 days, the Germans are broken. The Rhine is within reach, and now this. Assume the defensive, to words that go against everything Patton believes about war. 2 words that could end the momentum that's made him a legend. 2 words that, if obeyed, might give the enemy time to rebuild their shattered armies. Bradley's order is clear. Eisenhower's strategy is set. The main effort goes north to Montgomery. Patton's 3rd Army waits. But waiting is not in Patton's vocabulary. Within hours, he's drafted a response. Not a refusal that would be insubordination, something more subtle. A proposal for what he calls limited offensive operations, small attacks to adjust his lines. Local actions to keep his troops sharp, nothing that violates the defensive order. Nothing that challenges Bradley's authority, except it does, because sitting 40 miles ahead of Patton's positions is a city that hasn't fallen to an enemy since the year 415, Metz, ringed by 43 forts. Defended by concrete walls 15 feet thick. Guarded by guns that can strike anything within 6 miles. Metz is not a military necessity. The roads around it are open. The bridges to the east can be secured without ever engaging its fortress complex. Every staff officer at 3rd Army Headquarters knows this, some even say it quietly. But Patton sees something else when he looks at Metz. He sees history, he sees a reputation. He sees what taking the impregnable fortress would mean for George S. Patton. Bradley approves the limited offensive plan. Perhaps he trusts Patton's judgment, perhaps he believes the attacks will truly be limited. Perhaps he simply cannot say no to the general who's delivered him victory after victory since Sicily. The approval arrives, Patton issues orders. But his subordinates notice something troubling in those orders. The word limited has disappeared. The objectives have expanded. What was sold as defensive adjustment now looks like full-scale assault. And the target is Fort Driant, one of the strongest positions in the Metz complex. Perched on a hill 5 miles southwest of the city. Protected underground, its guns commanding the approaches to Metz itself. Intelligence reports say the fort is lightly held. They are wrong. September 27th, P-47s scream over Fort Driant, dropping 1,000-pound bombs and napalm. The fort seems to vanish in smoke and fire. When the bombers leave, Patton's infantry moves forward. To battalions, supporting armor, clear orders to take the fort and silence its guns. They reach the outer wire by afternoon. Bangalore torpedoes blow gaps in the barbed wire. Men rush through. Then the Germans open fire from positions that should not exist. From bunkers the intelligence said were abandoned. From tunnels the maps did not show. The attack stops at the fort's perimeter. 800 yards of advance, no breakthrough, no victory. Just bodies in the wire and radios crackling with requests for more ammunition. Patton's response is immediate. We have put our hands to the plow. We must finish the job. It's a revealing phrase. Not we must take the fort because it's strategically necessary. Not we must silence these guns to protect our advance. We must finish because we started. Because reputation demands it. Because George Patton does not retreat. For 2 weeks, his men attack Fort Driant. They crawl through mud and wire under artillery fire from neighboring forts. They fight with satchel charges and flamethrowers in underground passages that twist for miles beneath the hill. They pour gasoline into ventilation shafts and ignite it with phosphorus grenades, trying to burn out defenders they cannot see. The Germans counterattack from below. Fresh troops emerge from tunnels the Americans thought they'd blocked. Reinforcements arrive through passages no map recorded. Every yard costs blood. Every bunker becomes a separate battle. Captain Jack Jerry sends a message from deep inside the fort on October 4th. His words are chilling. The situation is critical. A couple more barrages and a counterattack, and we are sunk. We have no men, our equipment is shot, and we just can't go on, but Patton orders the attack continued. Fresh units replace Jerry's shattered company. The assault goes on. 5 more days. 5 more days of grinding combat for a fort that could have been bypassed. For a fortress that serves no purpose except to prove it can be taken. October 12th, 800 casualties. 15 days of fighting, 0 strategic gain. Patton finally orders withdrawal. It is the only battle George S. Patton will lose in the entire war. The only objective he will fail to capture. The only time his will is broken by enemy resistance. But the damage goes deeper than one failed assault. Because while Patton spent 2 weeks battering Fort Driant, the German army used that time. They reinforced the Moselle line. They moved divisions to block the roads Patton could have taken in September. They turned Lorraine from a vulnerable region into a fortress zone. The weather turns. Rain transforms roads into rivers of mud. The temperatures drop. Men develop trench foot by the thousands because supply shortages mean no winter boots. The fast war of August becomes the grinding war of October. And Third Army's rapid advance, the momentum that made Patton famous, dies in the mud outside Metz. Bradley knows something went wrong. The limited offensive became unlimited. The defensive posture became aggressive assault. The small adjustments became a major operation that achieved nothing. Trust begins to crack, not loudly, not publicly, but in quiet conversations at headquarters, in careful rewording of future orders, in the way Bradley now double-checks what Patton reports versus what actually happens in the field. Patton senses it. His diary entries become defensive. He blames supply shortages. He blames weather. He blames Eisenhower for giving Montgomery priority. He blames everyone except the general who decided Fort Driant had to fall. Because admitting that would mean admitting something George Patton cannot afford to admit. That ego, not strategy, chose the objective. That reputation, not military necessity, demanded the attack. That personal pride, not tactical wisdom, cost 800 men their lives for a fort that never needed to be taken. October 1944. Patton's headquarters. Maps cover every table. Staff officers trace routes around Metz, pointing out roads that could be used, bridges that could be seized, without ever engaging the fortress city. Patton listens. Then he orders the next offensive to focus directly on Metz itself. His reasoning is documented in staff meetings and diary entries. Metz has never fallen to an enemy since Rome collapsed. Taking it would be historic. Taking it would prove Third Army's superiority. Taking it would cement Patton's place among the great commanders. Not one of these reasons is military. The operational logic argues for bypassing Metz entirely. The city sits in a bend of the Moselle River. Its fortress complex covers ground that doesn't need to be controlled. The main roads east run north and south of the city. Seizing those roads would trap Metz's garrison without fighting, would isolate them without casualties, would achieve every military objective without costing a single life. Patton's own corps' commanders suggest this approach. Walker, commanding the 20th Corps directly opposite Metz, proposes a double envelopment. Swing around the city from north and south, cut it off. Let it wither while Third Army drives toward the Saar. The plan is sound. It's economical. It preserves combat power for objectives that actually matter. Patton rejects it initially, then circumstances force him to modify his thinking. Because the disaster at Fort Dryant has made one thing clear: fortresses don't fall to frontal assault anymore. Not these fortresses, not with the weapons and tactics Third Army is using. So he accepts the envelopment concept, but with a crucial change. The envelopment won't bypass Metz. It will surround Metz, trap it, then reduce it systematically. Still focus on the city, still take the fortress. Just use a different method. It's compromise disguised as tactical wisdom. It lets Patton claim he's learned from Fort Dryant while still pursuing the same fundamental objective. The objective that has nothing to do with winning the war and everything to do with personal legacy. November 8th, Third Army attacks, not at Metz initially, but on both flanks. Eddy's the 12th Corps on the right drives toward the Saar. Walker's the 20th Corps on the left pushes north to begin the envelopment. The weather is horrific. Freezing rain, snow, mud that swallows vehicles. Men without proper winter clothing shiver in foxholes filling with water. Trench foot casualties exceed combat casualties in some units. The 26th Division alone reports 3,000 cases. But Third Army keeps attacking, keeps pushing. Because momentum must be maintained. Because the offensive spirit must be preserved, because Patton demands it. His corps' commanders obey. They always obey. But they're learning something dangerous. They're learning that Patton's judgment isn't infallible, that his instincts can be wrong. That his certainty about what must be done doesn't always match what should be done. At Fort Dryant, they learned this the hard way. Companies shattered against concrete. Battalions bled white in tunnels, all because Patton said it had to fall. All because Patton couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. Now they're learning it again at Metz, watching divisions grind forward through terrible conditions toward objectives that could be bypassed. Watching casualties mount for real estate that has no military value. Watching their general pursue a prestige target while the pathway to Germany stands open elsewhere. Bradley watches too. From his headquarters, he receives Walker's reports. Eddy's casualty figures, the slow, costly progress toward a city that Third Army doesn't need to capture. He says nothing publicly, cannot say anything publicly. Because Patton is delivering results, not the spectacular breakthrough everyone hoped for, but steady advance. Towns falling, ground gained, German units withdrawing. But privately, Bradley's doubts deepen. This isn't the Patton of August. The commander who moved so fast the Germans couldn't react. The leader who understood that in modern war, maneuver beats attrition. This is a different Patton, one focused on symbolic objectives. One willing to sacrifice speed for prestige. One who can't distinguish between what makes good headlines and what wins wars. The fundamental problem is trust. When Patton said he'd conduct limited operations in September, Bradley trusted him. That trust was violated. The operations weren't limited. Fort Dryant proved that. Now Patton says Metz must fall. Says the fortress city is a genuine military objective. Says taking it will protect Third Army's flank and open the route to the Saar. Bradley wants to believe him. But he's not sure anymore, not after Fort Dryant. Not after watching Patton's judgment fail so completely. November 22nd, Metz falls. The first time since for 1580 headlines proclaim Patton's achievement, the impregnable fortress reduced. Third Army victorious, but the cost is staggering. Not just in casualties, though those are severe, the cost is measured in time. In opportunities lost, in momentum squandered. While Patton fought for Metz, the Germans rebuilt their defensive positions deeper in Lorraine. While Third Army ground forward through fortress complexes, the enemy moved reinforcements to the Saar. While Patton pursued prestige, the strategic situation changed. By late November, the window of opportunity that existed in September has closed. The fast war is over. The German army has recovered enough to fight coherently again. The weather has turned so bad that air support is sporadic. The supply situation has improved, but not enough to support the kind of deep penetration Patton attempted in August. And Third Army sits before the Siegfried Line, exhausted from 2 months of fighting that achieved far less than bypassing Metz and driving straight for the Rhine would have accomplished in September. Patton doesn't see it this way. In his mind, Metz validates everything. Proves his aggressive approach was right, shows what determination can accomplish against any fortress. His diary entries from late November are triumphant. The first commander in 15 centuries to take Metz, the general who broke the Moselle line. The leader whose audacity overcame every obstacle. Not one entry questions whether Metz needed to be taken at all. That question is being asked elsewhere, though. In Bradley's headquarters, in Marshall's office in Washington. In quiet conversations between staff officers who fought at Fort Dryant and wonder what those 2 weeks bought. The answer is becoming clear. Metz bought George Patton a headline. Fort Dryant bought him a defeat he couldn't acknowledge. What it cost was something more precious than casualties. It cost time, it cost position, it cost the trust his superiors had in his judgment. And in December, that loss of trust would lead to consequences Patton never anticipated. Because when the Germans attacked in the Ardennes, when Eisenhower needed to trust his commanders completely, he would remember Fort Dryant. Would remember Metz, would remember the general who couldn't tell the difference between military necessity and personal glory. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes. German panzers crashed through American lines in the largest counteroffensive the Western Allies have yet faced. The front splits open. Entire divisions are surrounded. The road to Antwerp lies exposed. Eisenhower summons his commanders to Verdun 3 days later. The situation is desperate. The Germans have achieved complete surprise. The battle could determine whether the war ends in 1945 or drags into 1946. Patton walks into the conference room with his characteristic swagger. While others look grim, he sees opportunity. A chance for Third Army to drive north, smash into the German flank, relieve the surrounded airborne troops at Bastogne. Eisenhower asks how soon Patton can attack. Patton answers 48 hours. The other generals think he's exaggerating. He's not. He's already issued preliminary orders, already begun shifting divisions north. Within 3 days, Third Army is fighting its way toward Bastogne. It is, by any measure, an extraordinary achievement. turning an entire army 90 degrees in winter conditions, changing the axis of advance while under pressure, attacking into the flank of an enemy offensive with speed and precision. This is the Patton of August, the commander who moves faster than anyone thinks possible. The general who understands that tempo wins battles. This is the Patton that Eisenhower needs. But it's also the Patton that 2 months of grinding combat at Metz nearly destroyed. The general whose judgment Eisenhower now questions. The commander whose word Bradley no longer fully trusts. That damage shows itself in subtle ways during the Ardennes battle. Eisenhower's orders to Patton are more specific than they were in August, more detailed, more carefully bounded. They anticipate the possibility that Patton might exceed his authority, might pursue objectives beyond his mission, might let ego drive operations again. The orders work. Patton relieves Bastogne. Third Army cuts into the German salient. By January, the bulge is eliminated. American forces are back on the offensive. It's a triumph, Patton's finest hour, many will say. The moment when his genius for mobile warfare saved the Allied position. But Eisenhower remembers Metz, remembers Fort Driant, remembers the general who pursued prestige over progress. And when the time comes to plan the final offensives into Germany, Eisenhower's memory shapes his decisions. The main effort goes north. Montgomery gets priority for the Rhine crossing. Patton's Third Army receives a secondary mission, important but not decisive. Bradley's 12th Army Group will cross the Rhine south of the Ruhr, but the killing blow will come from the north. Patton protests, argues his army should lead the advance into Germany, claims he can reach Berlin before the Soviets, insists he's proven his army is the most effective force on the Western Front. Eisenhower refuses, not because Third Army lacks capability, not because Patton lacks audacity, but because Eisenhower no longer fully trusts Patton's judgment about objectives. That loss of trust traces directly to September and October 1944, to the decision to attack Fort Driant, to the obsession with Metz, to the pattern of behavior that showed a general who couldn't distinguish between targets that mattered and targets that simply looked impressive. The irony is complete. Patton's hunger for prestige, for historic achievement, for the glory of taking an impregnable fortress, cost him the very thing he sought. Cost him the trust necessary to lead the final, decisive operations of the war. Third Army would cross the Rhine, would drive deep into Germany, would liberate territory and capture prisoners, but would never lead the main effort again, never be first across the Rhine, never get the mission to drive on Berlin. Those honors went to commanders Eisenhower could trust to distinguish military necessity from personal ambition. Commanders who didn't need to prove anything. Commanders who understood that winning the war mattered more than winning headlines. Years later, historians would debate Patton's campaigns. Some would argue Metz was a mistake, a costly diversion from strategic objectives. Others would defend it as necessary for protecting Third Army's flank. Both arguments miss the deeper truth: Metz was unnecessary militarily. The fortress could have been bypassed, its garrison neutralized without direct assault. Every competent staff officer at Third Army knew this. But Metz was necessary psychologically, necessary for George Patton's self-image, necessary for the legend he was building, necessary in ways that had nothing to do with the German army and everything to do with history's judgment. That's what made it unforgivable. That's what cost Patton more than the battle itself. Because great commanders must be trusted, must be given latitude, must be allowed to make decisions in the chaos of combat without constant oversight. That trust is earned through judgment, through demonstrating that personal glory and military necessity align. Don't forget to subscribe this channel History of Wars.